Richard, welcome back to This is Horror.
Thanks for having me again.
So, the last time we spoke was back in March of 2021. So, as I always do, what have been the biggest changes for you, both personally and professionally, in that time?
Good question. Personally, just 2 more years of what 2.5 more years of being a dad and a husband, and still live in the same place. We had recently moved into this old house, probably 6 months before that. Last time we spoke, so we're enjoying the new place, and yeah, not too much different personally and professionally. Same thing. I'm still, year 35, still just kind of chugging along,
Yeah.
um, writing, editing, publishing, reading, watching movies. Same old boring guy.
Well, I think a number of people would disagree with the boring guy kind
Mm,
of conclusion, but whether you are or not, your fiction is certainly not boring, and the books that are being put out
that's
via.
what
Yeah,
matters.
yeah. But I wasn't planning on going in this direction, but since you said, last time we spoke, you'd moved into an old house 6 months before, have there been any ominous happenings in the old house? It's just my horror brain, it hears old house and it's like, oh, is there
Oh
a
no,
story
sure,
there?
yeah. Well, especially it's 200. It's over 200 years old. Um, one the other it was built in two sections. One was built in the late 1700s, and the other part was built in the early 1800s. Um, well, I was going to say unfortunately, but maybe not. No supernatural occurrences or bumps in the night that have been bothersome for us. The previous owners claimed that there may have been a little sprinkling of that, but we haven't experienced any of that. But when we moved in, it was a pretty terrifying place, empty of furniture and in the dark. And that's why Billy and I ended up making the week before the workers were due to come in and start redoing a lot of things. Um, that's when we decided we needed to make a movie in there. So we
Yeah.
made a film called Murder House. And yeah, anyone who watches that can see what the house looked like before we renovated.
Yeah, yeah, and you couldn't get a more over horror title like Murder House. That is in your face right there.
Yeah,
And
I think the neighbors thought we might be crazy. You just named your house Murder House, and we actually discussed that. Is this bad luck? But so far, so good. It's a nice, peaceful place.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, is there anything in terms of the screenwriting or the filming that you're working on at the moment?
No, because of the strike, a lot of that stuff's just kind of on hold, and I've been really focusing on prose and novels, the occasional short story, but I've been focusing on the novels for the last few years. So I'm hoping that I heard that the Writers Guild and SAG and them, they met with the big guys today. So hopefully a deal will come out of that soon. But yeah, I mean, I have several film projects that are, at various stages, but nothing that we're working on, firsthand. I'm going to probably stay that way for a while and just focus on the books.
Yeah, yeah. As soon as you started answering, I thought, yeah, because I was thinking we talk a lot about your fiction, but you do have a big interest in film as well. So I wanted to know what's going on in that area. As soon as you started answering, I was like, this is like some got you question. It's like, are you working on something film related? Aha, the strike is on. You got
Well,
to stop
what? I,
that.
I still could be. I could still be writing and
Yeah.
not doing any business. But no, I'm trying to finish a new book right now, in the next few weeks before I hit the road, and I have a bunch of signings and appearances for Becoming the Boogeyman. So yeah, I'm just trying to clear the table before I get started.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm intrigued to talk about what the book is that you're working on at the moment, but I think just for the sake of talking about becoming the boogeyman, we should jump into that right now. So, I mean, I've actually just had a boogeyman marathon because I thought, right, let's read them back to back because it had been a couple of years since
Okay.
Chasing the Boogeyman. So I wanted to just before this conversation do that sequentially. But if I recall correctly, when you first wrote Chasing the Boogeyman, the idea was, that this is one and done. There's not going to be a sequel. So let's talk about how that came about.
Yeah, I had no intentions whatsoever. Writing one book with myself as the main character was enough. Um, and then one day ironically enough, I was riding my riding mower, mowing the lawn around the pond, just like I talk about in the book. And I did not drive into the pond this time, even though it was like a lightning bolt hit. I just had the idea, and I wasn't trying to think about it. It just came to me full fledged. The first chapter for Becoming the Boogeyman. It's like I saw it complete, and I knew it would end on the big reveal of who the victim was at the end of chapter
Mm,
one, Becoming the Boogeyman, and that ties it into Chasing the Boogeyman. And I fell in love with that big reveal, that gotcha moment. And by the time I was finished mowing the lawn, I came inside. I'm like, I think there's a sequel I need to write. So when my agent and I went to Simon and Schuster Gallery Books, and they offered a 2-book deal, I made sure that Becoming the Boogeyman was a part of that, and they've been very supportive and very excited. And Ed Schlesinger, who was my editor and the head of gallery, did a terrific job editing it, and made it a much better manuscript. And yeah, no intentions. Just like Wendy with Steve, we had no intention of there being a book 2 or a book 3. Same thing happened with this one, but a nice happy accident.
yeah, yeah. And was there any reluctance about writing a sequel once, chapter one came to you, or was there any reluctance on your agent's part or the publishers, or was everyone pretty much on board with this?
Everyone was on board. The only thing I do remember is that there was a little bit of a push to make it book 2 of that 2-book
Mm,
deal, to have a standalone book come out next.
mm,
By then I was sucked into the stories, and I kind of just said I'd really like Boogeyman to come next, and then this third book will be a standalone. So that was it. But I do think there's natural concern with sequels. They usually don't sell as well as the first one. Just like movies, they're rarely
right.
as they're rarely as good as the first one, or as well received as the first one, above and beyond sales. So, I think there's some natural concern for that. And I've been working extra hard on promoting, and working extra hard and getting the word out, and doing shows like this, which I enjoy. And, yeah, so I do feel just like I did with Boogeyman. It was other than the Gwendy books, it was my first big book my first book with a big publisher like that, and they had a lot
Yeah.
invested. So I felt like I have a responsibility to them to work as hard as I can to get the book out there. So I'm excited. The early response has been wonderful. Um, and we'll see what happens in a couple weeks.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, in terms of the first book, Chasing the Boogeyman, we spoke before about how this really does blend, fact and fiction in an almost Blair Witch way. I mean, if you'd have removed the little bit actually saying that this is fiction and you'd have removed the novel, then people would have gone full Blair Witch with their reaction to it. But I mean, for myself, and I know for other people, there were moments where I almost had to catch myself and be like, "Wait, hang on, is this real? No, no, no.
Right.
This is definitely a novel." But it was so kind of convincing and authoritative, and I'm wondering, did the book receive any kind of backlash from people? I mean, in the sequel, in the kind of novelization and alternate reality of your life, there's a lot of anti-Chizmar sentiment. But I'm wondering, in real life, did you have any readers that were either angry that it turned out not to be true, or were there people who went the other way and they were adamant, like, no, no, this actually did happen?
A little of both. I mean, the response was overwhelmingly positive, which was a relief and wonderful. But yeah, there were a handful of people who, I saw their messages online and things like that where they'd post on a thread. And I felt ripped off. I got to the end and I felt tricked, and I never respond to anything, like that. But there were times when I was tempted to just say, well, isn't that what you plopped your $25 down for, was to kind of be taken for a ride? Um, it was like a roller coaster ride. Just like any thriller, you got off and you were safe and you went right back to your life. But there's no guarantee what that journey is going to be like. Um, so yeah, there were a handful of people who were like ticked off that it wasn't real and felt like they got gypped. And then yeah, I mean, the best example I have of someone who insists that it really happened, the Edgewood Library, where the library I grew up, going
Mm,
to down the street from my hometown. And they and the library I wrote about in the book, they did a beautiful window display of, they did photocopies of the photos, they put up police tape, they put up copies of the book, and had quotes printed out from within the book. And it was a beautiful window display. I went and visited one day, and I had my picture taken in front of it with the librarians. Um, and one of them told me a story about an older lady who came in, and they said several people in the beginning kind of came in. I vaguely remember this, and da 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 da. Da. But as they got the book and read it, they realized I made up the murders. But there
mm.
was one older lady who insisted, no, no. They told her, it is made up. You can see it says a novel, and no, I was here. It happened. I remember. So there is someone back in my hometown who absolutely insists that the murders really happened.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess there was a further blurring of the line that, as you mentioned previously, and as I believe you mentioned in the afterword of the original book, Joshua Gallagher, for a moment, I was like, "Wait, is this a spoiler?" No, no, we're
No,
talking
no, no.
about the sequel now, so
Yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah.
okay. Joshua Gallagher was based on the Phantom Fondler, so that there was a kind of creepy guy going around doing untoward and definitely illegal by today's standards stuff.
Oh,
I'm
yeah,
sure.
and
Yeah.
and who knows, if he hadn't eventually been caught for a different crime, I mean, who knows
Mm,
if what he was doing as far as just breaking and entering and touching
mm,
women and escaping into the night, if that would have escalated. I mean, a lot of killers had started that way. They started by touching and observing and watching, and then it, gradually or not so gradually escalated to violence. So who knows? But yeah, he was based on the Phantom Fondler, and that was all true. And I suspect that the people who have that itch in their memory of something happening, that's what it was, because it did change the town to a certain degree. People started locking their doors and windows back there, and in the early '80s, where I grew up, people didn't do that all the time. Um, so yeah, and people did buy spotlights for their yards, and I heard rumors of people getting guns and things like that. So yeah, it definitely spooked the town. And I just, as I said in that afterward, I just took it a couple steps further, like what I thought could happen next.
yeah, yeah. And in terms of basing the Joshua Gallagher character on real people or kind of real serial killers and sociopaths, were there any that particularly came to mind? I mean, I know that you've spoke about, I guess, the attraction or the allure, not your own attraction, but in general to like charismatic serial killers such as Ted Bundy and Richard Ramirez. But I'm wondering, were there specific research in terms of serial killers that you turned to when writing both of these books?
Yeah, not so much a specific serial killer. I did do a lot of research. I did do a lot of reading. Um, in my mind, Joshua was always, and I delve into this in Becoming the Boogeyman. He was always more this faceless. I didn't want it to be charismatic. I didn't want it to be genius, even though I refer to that in the first book. Carly Albright, who was kind of my conscience in the book, she
Yeah,
said, "Rich, you want this guy to be brilliant. You want him to be Hannibal Lecter." And he might not be. She warned me. She said it just might be the
yeah,
weird sits in the corner of the room, and and has issues. And so to me, he was always much more the shape. You know, John Carpenter's The Shape from Halloween, which I wrote about
Mm.
again in Becoming the Boogeyman. He was this faceless boogeyman, um, much more of a campfire tale type of a villain. And but there, yeah, I mean, I've read so much about all of the various serial killers. I mean, so many of my short stories are based on the human monster as opposed to the supernatural. You know.
Yeah.
Um, creatures, and it's just always because I consider them the scariest things out there. The guy who you paid for your Slurpee or your soda at 7-Eleven, or the guy who held the door for you at the grocery store, and
Hmm.
you never know, and that's scary to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have to imagine that Becoming the Boogeyman is a little less autobiographical than, yeah, the original Chasing the Boogeyman, just purely because, I mean, Chasing the Boogeyman, there's so much from your childhood and growing up, and all you kind of needed, I say all you needed to do, but you've added like this serial killer element, these murders going on. But I mean, if you take that away, it's almost an autobiography. But with, Becoming the Boogeyman, you've now got, as I said before, this alternate reality of your life. So, I mean, was there any concern or difficulty in making the Richard Chizmar as authentic as possible, this Richard Chizmar character? Or did you not even care about that? And it's like, well, the Richard Chizmar of the book can be different to the Richard Chizmar of reality.
You know what? That guy could be different from reality, but I tried to make it as close to reality as I thought. That's the same thing with the first book. I mean, you're 100% right. I had people ask me, how much of the first book was really true, and I said, well, you take out the murders, um, and then you're looking at the stuff with my family and my friends, and the things I was thinking and doing, throughout my adolescence. All that stuff's true. Even the kind of gross stories. Yeah, I had friends who did this and that, and we threw crab apples at cars, and we got in trouble for this, and it was all true. And then, like you said, and then I got to the murders, and that's where I, was making stuff up. But even then, I had the dynamic of I'm writing about this real person or real people, group of people. How would they react, and most importantly, how would I react to the things that then began to happen in the town? And I felt like I had to be really as honest as I could be, and meaning I put myself in the shoes of that character, being me, and said, all right, well, how would you react if someone you knew on the peripheral of your small town was murdered? But you knew the older brother through school, and then how would you be if somebody else 2 streets over got murdered? you know how would you deal with your mom, who's this very emotional, feisty woman who kind of mourns for the world? Now this is happening right next door, and she's a mess. You're a horror guy, you're doing this magazine, you love the movies, and all of a sudden your town is kind of is like Haddonfield.
Mm.
So there were times, and I've said this before, where I tried to be as authentic and as honest as to how I thought I would act as possible, even when it didn't necessarily shine a positive light on myself. Um, I wasn't happy. I would never be happy that people were being killed or anything like that, of course. But, like the weather guy who can't help but feel his heart beating a little quicker because there's a hurricane coming. He
Mm.
doesn't want people to be, to lose their homes and floods and
Yeah.
all that. But you know what's it's what he does. It's what his passion is. So he can't help but having, some reaction to it. And I tried to be honest about that. And then I explored it a lot, more thoroughly in the second book. So yeah, that's kind of a long-winded answer to your question, and then with the second book, I did the same thing. I just tried to be honest. I put myself into some interesting situations where, the public outcry was both positive and negative, but as with anything that starts very positive, there are things that usually do turn negative. I've been really fortunate so far, but
Yeah.
I made the Rich Chismar in Becoming the Boogeyman not be quite so fortunate. You know, he had people. He turned into a much bigger, figure than I am in actual life. So he faced some obstacles that I haven't. And yeah, again, I just tried to be as honest as I could, and that's the only way I could really put myself in the book.
Yeah.
Because I joked with my family. I'm like, yeah, in the book, I run marathons and I work out twice a day and I eat healthy, and they're just like, oh my god. Um, but yeah, no, I had to write about the real me in order for the story to work, in order for me to believe it. First and
Mm.
foremost, I had to write about the real guy. So it's interesting, it's people have said, "Man, you're brave," and I'm like, I don't know if it's courage or foolishness, but I put as much of the real me down there as I could.
Yeah, yeah. And we know that if we read reviews, particularly if we jump into the kind of uncharted territory of Goodreads reviews, that
Oh,
the reviewers will be absolutely brutal and unflinching with what they say. So I wonder if you stumbled across any criticism specifically about the Richard Chizmar character, or has anyone been like, this guy is a real
oh,
asshole, and how do you react when it's like that? That's actually me.
yeah, you know what? I've been doing this for 35 years, like I said. So I've
Yeah,
got, and before that, I was an athlete. I went to college
yeah,
on a lacrosse scholarship. So I've been yelled at by coaches since I was a kid. I've got thick skin, and
yeah.
I understood. Fortunately, I understood really early on, and I think it was because I did so much editorial work. So I would publish an issue of the magazine. I would get This was back before email. I would get 20 letters from people saying the William F. Nolan story in issue whatever was my favorite story. I would
Mm,
also get 10 letters saying something else was their favorite story, and they hated the William F. Nolan story.
yeah,
I understood from a very early stage in my career that people, you know what, everyone's got different tastes,
yeah,
and you can't please everyone. So you really do. My thing is, once I'm finished with it, once I believe in a story or a novel to the point where I can put my name behind it and go market it and help my publisher sell it, then I'm happy.
yeah,
So do I want to entertain the readers? Do I want them to give their money's worth and all that? Absolutely. But you know what? If they don't like it, I did my best. So
yeah,
on this individual project, you didn't like it. And then as far as the personal side, I have not. The last time I looked at Goodreads, there were about 90 ratings for this. And the only reason I looked at it is because it's you don't know what anyone's going to think in the beginning.
yeah.
Um, and I was really pleased. It had like a 4.8, which is unheard of for Goodreads,
Mm,
and most everybody loved it. Blah 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 blah. Now I saw a graphic that someone posted. I think it's like a 4.6 or something, which is still ridiculous for Goodreads. That'll go down.
yeah,
Uh, and so I haven't read any beyond that first, like I said, like when it was at like 90. I haven't read any. I probably will at some point just for fun. We run a lot of ads on Facebook, so the comments that come on those are hilarious.
yeah,
Um, if you go to the ad that's running right now, there's probably 80%. They're like, "Oh, I love the first book. I can't wait to get this one," or "I've already pre-ordered." And then there's probably 10% which just don't make sense, like people on Facebook tend to do sometimes. And then the other 10% are from people saying, "I hated the first book. I didn't like the
yeah,
first book. So I'm not getting the second." So yeah. But as far as the personal, to get there, my favorite was a woman who had I don't remember whether it was like a Goodreads comment or if it was on an ad, but essentially she said, "Yeah, Chizmar seemed like a rotten kid, throwing stuff at cars and doing this and doing that. Who wants to read about that rotten kid for 300 pages?" And I immediately remember I took a screenshot and texted it to my whole family and all my friends. We got a kick out of that. So yeah, no, it doesn't bother me. It's like I could be one of those writers and say, "Hey, as long as you bought it and I got my royalty from it," but I'm just like, hopefully you enjoyed it, and if you didn't, sorry. Try the next one.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, you were saying about running the Facebook advertising, and I feel that like right now, particularly with Elon Musk having bought Twitter and rebranded it to X, there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of the social media landscape and like advertising and promotion. So I mean, and for a number of people too, like Facebook has almost been gone for years, or it's felt like it's on the way out. But
Right.
what do you see as the social media networks that are, useful for both marketing and advertising? And I know that actually the paid advertising and the unpaid marketing, it might be a different social media depending on which one you're going to do.
It's interesting because Twitter, which is no longer called Twitter, a lot of people are moving over to these other ones, Blue Sky, I think, and
Right.
people are shifting to Instagram. I've been very fortunate in that, and I had to be pulled into social media, a decade ago or whatever,
Yeah.
it was, kicking and screaming, thinking, "Oh my god, this is my nightmare," and I ended up loving it.
Mm,
I was able, for someone who doesn't go to a lot of shows or conventions, um, and much rather would stay home. This is a great way to interact with your readers, and I've met wonderful people. Again, I've heard horror stories from other creators of mass blockings and lynch mobs, and
mm,
I think in 10 years I've probably had to block a half dozen people who were just kind of argumentative, angry people who for whatever reasons. And So I've been very fortunate, and I think it has helped me tremendously. I have a couple hundred people who are delivering book plates and bookmarks to bookstores, um, for me. Just wonderful. Some of them thanking me for doing it. And I'm like, I have to stop them each time. I say, no, thank you. You're doing
right.
me a favor. This is wonderful. And people who share the posts that I make and that kind of thing. And then it's wonderful because most of it's just conversation. Most of it's talking about, hey, has anyone seen this? Or my youngest son Noah's home for the weekend. He loves whodunits. So hey,
Mm,
suggest some who done it movies for us to watch, that kind of thing. And I've been able to kind of build this very personal relationship with my readers, and like I said, it's a big surprise to me, but I enjoy it. I do my best to reward them for their loyalty. And I discover a snake in my backyard, I take a picture and I post it, and I says,
yeah.
can somebody tell me what this is? And I have 50 or 100 responses in an hour. And
Mm,
that's pretty cool.
yeah.
um so yeah, and as far as marketing, I hear a lot of people are abandoning Twitter or X, whatever the hell you want to call it. I'm one of the ones who's hanging around. I'll hang around until it's dead, because again, I've cultivated the friendships that I have on there.
Yeah.
Uh, I know they've done a wealth of good as far as on the business side of things and marketing, but the
Mm,
personal side is just as important. So I'll hang there. Same thing with Instagram and Facebook, and you know, I to kind of answer your question more pointedly, I think now is a really difficult time to start marketing on a
right.
place like Twitter or even Facebook or Instagram, because people are, we're a very divided country right now, and things get in the way of just pure entertainment. Um, so I think right now, as far as just beginning to try to get your name out or market a book,
Mm.
when you haven't done this before, it's a difficult time, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah, yeah. I think if you were starting out and you had to pick one social network, it's like, well, goodness, it's almost like the toss of a coin because who knows which one will be the dominant one. I do think a few years back, Twitter, as you said, was the place for conversation, at
Mhm.
least, and for getting all of those responses. You know what? I think it probably still is. I think it is, but as we've said, there's uncertainty as to the future. But like yourself, I'll be sticking around until it effectively doesn't exist because there's a lot of worry that it won't. But I mean, Mark Twain said something along the lines of, which I'll completely butcher. I've had a great deal of worries in my life, much of which were imagined. So rather than worrying about a future possibility, let's look at what the reality is right now. And right now, it is functional, it is existing. And I think both of us have got thousands of people, possibly tens of thousands in your case, who are following you, and that's not something to be thrown away.
No, no, and like I said, there are people who I only interact with on Twitter. They're
Yeah,
not on Instagram or Facebook, and the same thing goes for the other ones. I have a lot more, long time friends from my hometown and stuff on Facebook, and I think
yeah,
that
yeah,
it is for most older people.
yeah.
Instagram's kind of a mixture, and now Twitter's becoming more of a mixture. But Twitter is just a lot of really hardcore readers and fans of the
Mm,
genre, and plenty of people who I really enjoy talking to who have never mentioned my work, have probably never read anything I've written, but we have a lot of shared interests. Whether it's a
yeah,
football or baseball or movies or other horror, and suspense and thriller writers. So yeah, I would miss that too much. So until Elon tanks it, and puts it down on the seafloor with the Titanic, I'm going to hang around and see what happens.
yeah, yeah. Well, let's hope that he doesn't. And
Oh, I'm hoping.
I
Knock on.
mean, at one point he was just running everything in terms of Twitter, and then he's at least handed it over to another person to kind of be the CEO. So it could be a lot of kind of posturing and bravado, and we might see in the next few years. It's like, okay, he's delegating to more people. Which you think he might want to do because he's got a really successful business in terms of Tesla, in terms of the stuff he's doing with SpaceX. It's like surely that's where you want to put your time.
I've said for a while now, that most everyone has that one friend who likes to say or do outlandish, illogical things for
Yeah.
attention, and they enjoy seeing that ripple effect within their friend group. Well, imagine if you're
Mm.
him and that group is millions and tens of millions of people.
Yeah.
Why? Sometimes I think he just, he's out there having lunch and he's like, "Watch this," and he tweets something, and he watches that ripple, but it goes around the world instead of the room. Um, so yeah, sometimes I think he's just playing games, and other times I don't waste too much thought on it. Like you said, Mark Twain
Yeah,
said,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
man, I'm not going to worry about that. When it happens, it happens. I've seen the following count drop because there's a mass exodus, and then like half of them come back. I've seen people say for farewell, this is it for me, I've finally reached the breaking point, and then some of them 6 months later are back, and others you see on Instagram or whatever. So yeah, I'll go for the ride and see what happens, and go from there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's more I could say about that, but let's
Oh
move
yeah.
it back towards the boogeyman. And I mean, you said before that when you wrote the original, if this had really happened, if the murders had really happened, then you reckon that you, as a 22-year-old, would have absolutely written that book. But I mean, if we think about the sequel, I mean, if this had actually happened and things had played out, so you'd got a lot of fame off the back of that, you'd made a lot of money, do you think you would have written the sequel? Because, like, to me, that feels more complicated because we've also had conversations before about the dangers in glorifying murder, in the
Right.
commodification of murder. So I feel that there are more moral dilemmas at that point.
It's again, that's what the second book really tries to get to the heart of. Um,
Mm,
and it tries to look at the issue from both sides. And I feel like that spotlight is pretty unflinching when it's looking at me, where, sometimes despite your best intentions, you still aren't completely in the right. And then that there's a gray line there, and I thought about that a lot, even with the first book, because I'm a big true crime fan.
mm,
I've read a lot of books, in that area. It's really easy, and I've put down a lot of books without finishing them. It became increasingly easier to kind of spot the books that were done for sensationalistic financial reasons.
Mm.
And the writing was not careful. The writing was not intelligent. Um, and then there were books where it really was. You could tell the writer was invested in the story. He was invested in not only trying to understand the evil that happened here, as well as the survivors, and to kind of tell the story of the victim, so that the world can know who this person was, that the world was robbed of, through this crime.
Mm.
And I wrote about this in Chasing the Boogeyman, how much respect I have for those writers who do it well, because it's not easy.
Mm.
And I think, I've said before, Chasing the Boogeyman was kind of my cheating way of doing a true crime book. I like doing
Yeah.
research. I like doing research. I'm interested in the genre, obviously, but I think if I had to write a genuine true crime book, it would be very difficult, because emotionally, I think I would have a very difficult time separating
Mm.
myself. Um, and then I kind of looked in the mirror and I was like, yeah, those are the ones you enjoy, the ones where the writer had that difficulty separating themselves. So they just put themselves fully into the story. James Renner, who wrote the introduction for Boogie the Man, he has several books like that.
Yeah.
I'll Be Gone in the Dark. Michelle McNamara certainly is an example of someone who was so fully invested in the story that so passionately that her own life suffered. And I
Mm.
think that would be me. So I think I'll stay away from true crime and continue to make stuff up. But yeah, that fascination that we have, um, is an interesting thing, and it's very scary, because there's one thing to be interested in the dark side of humanity, which I am, and to want to explore that and better understand it. And it's another thing to wear a T-shirt that has, Gacy's face on it, or on
Yeah.
the back has Charlie Manson, or to get a tattoo like Charlie Manson's, and
Yeah.
that kind of thing. There, and again, that's in this. A lot of that's in the second book, where it's just like, whoa, there are people out there with bad intentions, who are using this as kind of a textbook, or a playbook. So yeah, hopefully that comes across in the second book, and isn't preachy or anything like that, but it just gives people something to think about.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, you make a good point that, of course, if we're writing about the murders, but we're doing so in a way that it doesn't glorify the serial killer, it does actually shed light on the victims and respects them, then that is not only valid, but actually important in keeping their memory alive. But yeah, it would be a lot harder to justify, like, well, why did you get that tattoo of Dharma's face? Like, I can't see how you could say that was
Or
like, you know.
why are you running a website devoted to this person? Or there's, yeah, it's just, for me it is about that, that inability to understand, and I keep saying this, but this is a thread in that second book, where I have Carly Albright and my wife kind of hitting me with that. It's like, Rich, you've spent all these years trying to understand something, and sometimes you just can't. Sometimes it's like Stephen King's book From a Buick 8. There are Buicks everywhere. Sometimes there's these things, people that you come across in life, that no matter what you do, you're never going to be able to hold it in your hand in a reasonable, understandable way. So you can't spend your day shaking your fist at the sky, cursing God for giving you this mystery. You kind of just have to accept it and move on. And for me, that's what this book was about.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I think for me, a lot of the fascination with true crime in general is attempting to understand, as you say, almost the ununderstandable, that with which we can't understand. And it's like trying to understand, like, human psychology and what brings somebody to that point. But I guess when a lot of it comes down to people being clinically a sociopath or a psychopath, well, if you're not wired that way, then understanding it in at least an empathetic level is near impossible. But yeah, I do think a lot of the fascination is just like, well, how did this happen? What are the circumstances? And I mean, Bob and I have spoke at great length before as well, how, that there's sociopaths that are almost built that way. There's nature and then there's nurture, and yeah,
Right.
that there's all sorts of lines in between.
Yes. Yes. And yeah, I mean, and look at Henry Matheny from Becoming the Boogeyman. That whole nature versus nurture. I tried to
Yeah,
explain that, and it's just it's interesting because like the true crime books that I read, I've talked about this when people have asked me about the photographs that were included in Chasing the Boogeyman, and they're there again in Becoming the Boogeyman. And I talked about my own personal experiences with true crime books and the photographs. And I always said I hated how they were always in one section and you had to keep flipping over to that section. But the photographs that were most fascinating to me and the most haunting and memorable to me, they were never ones that had blood splatter or anything like that. Most of the well done true crime books did not have gory photos and sensationalistic photos. It was more, the photo, the stark realness of the photo of this trampled patch of grass behind a shed where the murder occurred. Those kind of things, or the
mm,
sofa with the pillows that were thrown on the floor during the struggle and the coffee table that's just on its side, but there's no blood. But you're envisioning what happened there. And you're also thinking to yourself, or I certainly was, I've seen this scene, 1,000 times in my life. As a kid, I used to run, the shortcuts behind the sheds, and you would, I used to dig for worms behind my neighbor's house behind their shed. And you think about someone, the end of someone's life occurring right there in that grass, because
mm.
crime scene photo, that photo was taken after the body was taken away. And I would, those are the ones that, the very non-sensationalistic ones, but the ones that kind of wouldn't leave my brain. And those are the kind of thoughts that led me to making sure that I included photos in the books, because I try to make them as realistic as possible, and to show as little as possible. And many times just, and also the photos that affected me most were just their school photos or their candids of them at a birthday
Yeah,
party. This photo was taken at so and so's birthday party 3 months before the murder, and that just killed me because I'm like, oh my god. So yeah, that those like you said, you're trying to understand, you're trying to get some kind of meaning out of where, there really isn't anything there to find.
yeah. Yeah, and I think, talking about the realism and the photos, this lends rather nicely into a topic that our patron Brandon Simmons wants us to talk about. So, I mean, you obviously write not just characters based on real people from your hometown, but you write actual real people into your stories. So, I mean, firstly, in terms of that, my understanding with like your friends and your close contacts is, you got their permission in terms of doing that. But I mean, what kind of creative license were you given, and did you have to run different passages past them?
No, I mean my lifelong friends are they're like family. So I had just, in almost all those cases it was just a matter of, hey, you know, you're in this book. Is that all right? Yeah, absolutely. But give me a bigger role. No matter what I have, make me a bigger,
Yeah.
character.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean the lawyers. Simon Schuster's lawyers are the ones that look through there. Anything that is remotely negative. Um, I trust me. I've been questioned over multiple times. All right, this isn't a real person because you say this person was a notorious cheapskate and had body odor. Is this a real person? No, I made that person up. Okay, good. you know the guys who are all playing football, are those your friends? Yeah, that nothing remotely questionable happens there, so they can be my real friends. So yeah, I mean there's obviously for the pictures I need release forms signed by everyone who's in there. I don't need that for the real people or the real places. I Like I said, their legal department is kind of goes over everything and makes sure it's okay. But yeah, the only person who doesn't want to be in the book's my wife, and she's
Right.
stuck. She's not happy, but and she refuses to read it until she says 6 or 7 months after it's been out. That way, everyone who talks to her about it, she can say, I haven't read it, so they can't talk to her about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, she knows nothing about it other than the handful of details I've shared, and yeah, she's the only reluctant character.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, Brandon wanted to know, and I suspect that this may apply to other books of yours and other stories rather than the Boogeyman more, although there will be some crossover. But he says, how do you go about writing characters that are based on people in your life, but without actually writing real people into your story? And how would you capture the way that they talk without it being obvious it was somebody you grew up with? And I know that you will have done this because this is what all of us writers do.
Well, you know what? Yeah, it's interesting because yeah, I do think everyone does that, but you're usually capturing such even in a novel, you're capturing such a small slice of what that person is like. So unless you're duplicating, their favorite sayings or the lightning bolt tattoo that they have on their right shoulder,
Yeah.
or the
Yeah.
scar that they have, on the left, to the left of their mouth or whatever. Um, it's like I said, you're usually capturing such a small slice of them that it's usually not that evident. I wrote a
Mm.
story called Blood Brothers, about a couple of brothers who are adults now, and they were super close growing up, super close right up and through the beginning of adulthood, and then they kind of went separate ways. One became the black sheep of the family, ended up going to prison. The other one, got married, had a baby, started a
Mm.
small business, and the bad guy, the bad brother gets out of jail, and then things happen.
Yeah.
Um, and I have one of my best friends came to me after that story was published, and he said, "I know that was about me and blank, his brother." I said, "No,
Mm.
it absolutely wasn't about you and blank." And he didn't
Right.
care. He didn't care, but he just said, "I know we inspired it." I said, "No, you really didn't." Probably 6 months later, someone else I knew, not like I said, this guy's one of my closest friends in the world. I'm still very close with, and he's mentioned in Becoming the Boogeyman. But probably 6 months down the road, someone who was just kind of a acquaintance, on the peripheral, went to school with him in earlier days. He said the same thing. He goes, "Was that story inspired by me and my brother?" It's like absolutely not. Um, then I had a reader point out, "You write a lot of stories about brothers that aren't, do you have a brother and are you close?" And I actually wrote about this in an afterword to one of my short stories. I said, "Yeah, my brother's like 12 years older than me, much
Mm.
older. Joined the army, was gone, before I got too old. And we love each other to death. And, if we were the bad apple and the good one, he would have to be the good one because he had, retired military, straight and narrow.
Mm.
The bad one. So there is no, I'm like, no, it's not modeled after that. But yeah, you're always pulling little bits and pieces. And yeah, sometimes I get a character in my head, I've got to write about this guy and I'll think, he reminds me a lot of Charlie. So a little bit of Charlie will go into him, but I've never, even all the short stories I've written, I've never really done that. I've never really had a secondary character that is 100% or even predominantly modeled after someone from real life. Until Boogeyman, that's part of the fun of being a fiction writer, is just making that stuff up. Now, people I've seen
Yeah.
in public, things I've overheard phrases standing in line to get my food, or that kind of thing, and boom, I've scribbled them in my phone right away and used them in a story or a script. And I say that quite often. I'm like, oh, I got to use that. um,
Yeah.
and sometimes it's seeing somebody's mannerism or that kind of thing, but yeah, we're always scavenging the public.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I think is like a completely valid and actually exciting kind of creative writing prompt. You hear a snatch of dialogue and now you inform this entire person's life, this person's persona. And yeah, I mean, it would be very bizarre if you overheard something at the store and then you made up this character and then it actually was exactly the way that their their life had panned out. If it was, then it's like, hang on, I might want to tap into that. That could be some sort of power that I've got that
Right,
could
right,
make me
right.
a lot more money than writing fiction.
And you know what? No telling how many people, how many readers out there have read a character, in a story or a book, or even seen them in a movie, created by someone they have no connection to whatsoever, and thought that guy's writing about me. I'm
Yeah.
sure people have thought that before. But it does add that kind of extra cool dynamic when it's someone and you're thinking, hey, like, is he talking about me? That kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, I feel too, there's only a finite amount of like kind of good and bad action. So I feel that we have probably both seen in a movie or read in a book like a character behaving in maybe an unscrupulous manner and they kind of get called out or it's drawn attention to and we think, shit, that's kind of similar to me. It might not be exactly, but it's like you feel like seen or like you've been caught.
Right, right, exactly.
But I mean, let's see now. So when we spoke before, so actually the last time we spoke, it was a little bit before the original Boogeyman book had came out. So it hadn't been released at that point, but you had spoke about this idea of potentially turning the Boogeyman story or something connected to it into a podcast. Is that something you're still considering or looking into?
You know what? That was back when I really wanted to kind of Blair Witch the audience, and
Mm,
that's how I said it. And then they put the disclaimer in and put a novel on the front, and again, the legal department made me understand in a hurry that that wasn't a good idea.
yeah.
Even though tons of people still Googled and believed it, which was wonderful. So yeah, that was one of those secondary ideas. I wanted to have my oldest son Billy, who's a filmmaker also as well as a writer. I wanted to have him do a documentary, you know,
Mm,
kind of like they did with the Blair Witch. They did the origin of the Blair Witch legend, and people believed it, and they thought well, yeah, the movie was real life, and this was real life, and I kind of wanted that to be there on the internet when people went to search, and I was going to plant fake newspaper articles and a fake website that had been discontinued back in the '90s and that kind of thing.
mm,
And that whole podcast idea was kind of similar, where I wanted to just play it completely straight and have and have people talking about these murders, and Joshua Gallagher, and have his old friends on the show, and maybe a teacher and that kind of thing. But yeah, there hasn't been time to do that yet, but who knows, maybe down the road, because I think it would be interesting.
yeah. Like
I just
I
had
feel
fun.
I yeah, I feel in spite of having the books out and it clearly saying a novel, you could still Blair Witch a podcast audience. I mean, for various reasons. I mean, number one, the podcast audience and the book audience are not necessarily the same audience. So, I mean, there will be crossover, but there'll be a lot of people listening to the podcast who probably haven't even heard of the book. Unfortunately for us,
Oh,
like
for sure.
novel writing is a very niche kind of interest.
Yeah.
But I mean,
I was going to
yeah,
say, unless you're King or Patterson or one of those guys, yeah, you're talking about a drop in the bucket compared to a lot of the other mediums out there, movies, film, television, and some of the podcasts. So, what I need is someone who wants to spearhead that, and gets both books and goes through them in detail and has character lists, and then can kind of put together
yeah,
scripts, and because I would be willing to be on there as much as they needed, and to play whatever role, and I know plenty of others would be too. But yeah, just the idea of putting it together and writing the scripts and all that would be is pretty daunting when
yeah.
I got too many deadlines right now.
Right, yeah. And when you've got like a number of kind of paid writing gigs, you need to make sure that someone's financing the podcast, which I mean, if you think about logistically the time that you'd need to put it together, it will probably take longer than just writing another novel.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting because on one hand, I think I could, I think, a good group of creative people could sit down and whip out that, the debut episode,
Mm,
within a couple weeks. You get a
mm,
couple voice actors in there to talk, to be, somebody's got to be Carly Albright. Somebody's,
yeah,
I can be me, or they can have someone else be me, however they want to do it. But I think it would be interesting. I mean, and I would be willing to put, some finances behind it, because I think it
yeah,
would do nothing but help sales of the books.
yeah,
Um, and on one hand, that's kind of the beauty. If you're the guy in charge, you have complete control, so you can do everything the way you want it. But that's the thing. Yeah, too busy to do everything the way I want. So who knows? Maybe down the road I'll find a partner and do it that way. But or
yeah.
maybe Billy. But Billy's starting to rack up a lot of writing deadlines himself. So
Mm,
I don't know if that time it's going to happen for him either.
yeah, yeah. And since we're talking about adaptations, is there any movement in terms of a potential film adaptation? Obviously, we mentioned about the writer's strike at the start, but given that the Boogeyman books have now been out, for what, like over 2 years, if we include the original, I imagine that conversations have happened.
Yeah, there's been a lot of conversations, and there's I can't really go into too many details, but there's a director who's very passionately involved, and there's meetings and all that stuff. But right now everything's on hold. So hopefully when that situation fixes itself, there'll be news soon after.
Yeah, yeah. And since we're talking about movies, I just want to check if this is true. And I expect it's just going to be an absolute yes. But you've got a very small reference to Ryan Lewis kind of harassing you to play online chess for absolutely months. And then you finally gave in and he absolutely obliterated you. Can you confirm whether this is accurate and actually happened?
It actually did not.
It
Um,
did not. I was so convinced.
yeah. Well, that's good. That means I did well. That means that it was believable, because yeah, I'm one of those guys who is just like, chess is a flippin' mystery to me, and
Right.
people have tried. So that is what would have happened if Ryan and I played, I'm sure. But yeah, that reminds me. Um, I need to remind him that he's in the book. That I
Yeah.
just
So
emailed him.
has he not read that part then?
You know what? I'm sure he has by now. But yeah, I forgot to bring it up again. But yeah, I was actually speaking to him about the next book. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, that's we won't talk about that scene too much, but it's just funny that you bought it, because and why not? Because that is the way it would be. You bug someone forever. Come on, let's do this, and then you finally do it, and you get your ass whipped, and you're like, okay, never mind.
Yeah.
That was fun.
Yeah.
Done.
Wow. I think like my life lesson here is to stop buying bullshit stories about Ryan Lewis because before I first spoke to him, Max Booth thought it would be funny to convince me that he was really into electronic music because I had this meeting with Ryan and I was like, like, do you have any tips or any ideas? Because I'm talking about like film adaptations. And he's like, well, all I can say is like, he really, really likes kind of hardcore electronic music. So if you reference that, then like, that could put in a good impression. And
Um,
that is totally what Max Booth would do,
right.
and I should have known, the context, the kind of hat tip or the idea is like it's Max Booth telling you this. But yeah,
Yeah.
I found out quickly that it's like he's not into that at all. But
What the hell are you talking about?
luckily Ryan is a very friendly and amazing guy. So
Oh yeah,
me
that's
me
fun.
Me trying to be like, so like I hear you're into
That's
hard
great.
house music did not sully the relationship.
That is hilarious. I love it.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, talking about, this being a true crime homage, were there things that you put in place, particularly when you knew that it would be marketed as a novel, to ensure that you didn't go down a more kind of Hardy Boys route? Was there ever a temptation to do that?
No, not really. I mean, in fact, even as it was, the Hardy Boys references that I make sure that I put a few in there, um, because I wanted it to be, right there on the surface that, yeah, you guys are stepping over some lines a little bit. And, I do know quite a few, people who are, in the police department and some detectives
Yeah,
and that kind of thing. So I know that their sense of humor, I know their cynical kind of view of life, and I could just hear them right now, the amateur detectives, you guys are, playing Hardy Boys, or, you want to think
mm,
Nancy Drew and that kind of thing. So yeah, I knew right away that I had to cut that kind of thinking off at the pass, and so I threw myself under the bus there.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, we've said that you've got a new two-book deal, an original book, and then this sequel.
Right.
Are there any talks or thoughts about potentially doing a third Boogeyman book? Because, I mean, obviously, there was never the intention to do a second, but I feel once somebody does a second, it's then like, well, I've already done book two. Maybe I could just do book three. And of course, from a marketing perspective, you can then potentially later repackage as a trilogy, particularly for the audio audience, and then kind of sell it that way. So, is there potential for a third?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and again, when I started this one, I had no thoughts of a third. I actually, at some point after the negotiations for the deal, I actually said, and don't worry, I'm not going to be writing about myself anymore. And then I got to the last chapter of Becoming the Boogeyman, and
Yeah,
I will not say anything about it. I will not give any, any, hint. But the way the book ends is obviously could lead directly to a third. Um,
yeah,
yeah, I'm going to write a third at some point, whether or not they want me to or not, I don't know. I imagine that'll come down to how the second book does.
yeah,
Um, but to me, the story's not finished yet now. So, and there's some questions that need answering. So yeah, at some point I'll write the third one, and see what happens. But right now, like I said, I'm finishing up this book called Memorials, and that's the last book of my contract. And then hopefully, well, actually today it just got announced today, in the trades, that my son and I, Billy, are
mm,
we had written a novella a while back called Widow's Point, and
yes,
we went to Simon and Schuster to a gallery, and we proposed the idea of saying, "Hey, this is like a 20 something thousand word novella,"
mm,
and we really envision it as like the first third or fourth of a full book, of a
mm,
full length novel. And they they said, well, what do you think comes next? So we put together a short proposal, and they bought it. So I'll finish Memorials like in the next 3 weeks, and then, like I said, I'm on the road for all of October and a little bit of November, and then sometime in December, Billy and I will start writing our Haunted Lighthouse book, and
yeah,
turn that into Simon and Schuster. The late winter, into 20, and that'll be published in 2025. So yeah, I was thinking, I'm finished this 2 book contract. So what's next? But Widow's Point is what's next. And then after that, hopefully more books. I love the team there at Simon Schuster. So I hope to keep going, and doing well for them. So we'll just wait and see.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, talking about your collaboration with Billy, this leads nicely into a question we've got from Alice Phelan via Patreon, who simply wants to know, do you have any recommendations when it comes to finding collaborators?
You know, um, I don't because, or actually I probably do, but the collaborations that I've all been involved in have been very natural kind of falling ins. It's like you're talking to someone, and just like with Stephen King, you're talking about collaborating, and then but not with each other. You're just talking about collaborations in general, and then he mentions, "Hey, I have this story." Um,
Mm,
that's usually the way they've occurred. In some cases there's been, I've certainly given some thought, and you want to pick someone who you think that you're going to be able to meld your style, their style into one, you know cohesive voice.
mm,
That I think that's the biggest thing, is just being able to kind of weave your words with someone else's until there's a cohesive voice. You don't want it to be abrupt. You don't want people trying to figure out who wrote what and that kind of thing. So yeah, no magic formula. Just who do you who, and also temperament. Who do you think you can work with? Who would you enjoy working with? That's I
yeah,
was in with Stephen King last night, and he brought up Gwendy, and I said we had fun. That was the most important thing. He's
yeah,
like, "We really did." And if you're going to collaborate with someone, man, unless you're being paid a shitload of money, to do a movie with someone or something like that, and you're down in the trenches and it's really work. When you're talking about, just doing a story or a book, make sure it's someone who you're going to have a good time with.
yeah, yeah. And I know that in previous episodes, we spoke more at length about the collaboration with Stephen King and about the process, about how all that came about. So, for people interested, definitely go back to those episodes. But I'm wondering, what do you envisage the collaborative process will look like with Billy for, the new Haunted Lighthouse book?
That's interesting because I don't know yet going in.
Mm,
I know in the first book it was interesting because he really wanted me to provide most of the backstory, and then where his energy, he's a very high energy writer, gets the words down on paper quickly. He wanted to be more responsible for the part of that story where the main character is spiraling into insanity, and things are just being, kind of thrown out all over the place. And that kind of matched his strengths. So I don't know whether
mm,
that's going to happen with this book. Whether we're going to, adapt a more kind of linear way of, hey, here's my 25 pages, you write the next 25,
mm,
or not. But that's part of the exciting thing about it. That's what I would say to the person who asked that question is, that's the feeling you want, which is kind of like you're rubbing your hands together, going, ah,
mm,
it's collaboration should be challenging, it should be fun,
yeah.
and it should also be all about discovery and kind of making each other better. None of that
Yeah.
stuff trapping someone in a corner and making them write their way out of it. No, you're trying to build
Yeah.
this seamless story. And more than anything, it's about trust. Trust the other guy, trust the other person.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I found when Bob and I collaborated on their watching is if we got trapped, we were trapped together. So we're then both kind of bouncing back. Well, we've got ourselves into a situation. How the hell are we going to get out of it? Like coming up with different things, and invariably the truth or the solution, it was something that came a little bit from me, a little bit from Bob. We wouldn't have arrived at that together if we were separately. It was only through being together, and I think that's kind of the point too. If you could have done the story on your own, then why are you collaborating?
Yeah, and that's writing is such a solitary, activity, that's kind of, again, the joy of it is you have someone to
Mm,
bounce things off of. Um, and they're as invested in it as you are. It's not like you're just,
yeah,
having to mention it to another writer friend, and, they give you 3 minutes of their attention, then they're worried about their own thing. In this case, their name's going on it too. So they're,
yeah,
and that's a fun thing, is kind of blue sky and pulling things in and out. And
yeah,
the other thing, like I said, is trust, and have that thick skin, have the ability to be able to tell, no, I think I like this better, and make sure you're able to kind of open your mind enough to consider that.
yeah, yeah. No, that makes total sense. And I mean, obviously, you've said you've got a lot of different projects and plans in terms of creatively for the future. You said that Billy's work is really stacking up at the moment as well. So, I mean, when you both work on this, does that become kind of your main focus and everything else is kind of on hold, or are you both working on this, but then you've also got your kind of solo work at the same time? Is there a deadline that is set when you want to have had the first draft done? I'm just wondering a little bit more in terms of the logistics and minutiae of it all.
Yeah, I mean, we'll probably give ourselves a deadline to aim for, and then not worry about it at all.
Mm,
Um, but Billy will have other things to do because he has his Patreon, page, and he'll have to continue with his monthly postings. Um, Something will come up for me. I will not start another book. This will be mainly, come December, this will be my main focus. I know something will come up. Someone will remind me, "Hey, you promised me you would do this 2 years ago," and I'm like, "Oh crap." So I'll squeeze that in. But no, this will be my main focus until we're finished. Um, and then we'll see what's next. But yeah, I'm gonna have to. We'll have to time it properly because Billy will have to take some time to make sure he posts on Patreon.
yeah, yeah. And what, if anything, can you tell us about this novel that you've almost finished writing?
Um, I can tell you, it's called Memorials. It's an idea that I have had for a very long time. Um, it's set back in the '80s again,
Yeah.
like Chasing the Boogeyman. I needed no technology, and I needed it to also be an earlier, kind of more innocent time. But the memorials of the title are these roadside memorials that you see that pop up, pretty organically after there's
Mm,
a fatal accident or that type of thing. And I've always been fascinated with them. And much in the same way as kind of my true crime fascination, where it's just like, there's stories there. There's stories behind each one. And obviously there's sad stories. And
yeah.
then you see roadside memorials that are abandoned and the people stop going, and which is its own weight, for people to carry. Not only the people who are involved, but just people who drive by and walk by. They see it every day. It triggers some people, from their own experiences, and that's one of the reasons why there's been you know there's been all these different reasons that some places want to do away with them. Everything from
Mm,
they're eyesores to they're dangerous because they're distracting, to they have triggering effects on some people, blah blah blah. um, but there's always been a fascination for me, and I so the story that I'm writing is about three college students in 1983 who are they're doing a school project. They're on a road trip, so it's a road trip novel. And as a school
mm,
project, they're going to do a documentary on these roadside memorials, and they're doing video, they're doing photography, and then they're doing commentary. They're trying to find the story behind each one of these, the ones that they feature in their documentary. They're trying to talk to survivors, family members, friends. They're trying to tell the stories of the deceased, in a really dignified way. And what happens is, because it's a horror novel, they start noticing some similarities that appear
mm,
on many of these roadside memorials, and it's bad stuff, and bad stuff begins to happen to them, and that's the book. It's a little bit, it's a little bit like Race with the Devil, where the old movie with Fonda,
mm,
and where you see something you shouldn't, or you discover something you shouldn't, and it ties in a little bit with Chasing the Boogeyman then, because of the way that he would leave mementos at those
mm,
memorials. So yeah, it's I've always had the idea of, what if you were doing a study or a documentary on these, a series of roadside memorials over a pretty broad area, and you started noticing some troubling things that are similar to many of them, and the deeper you delve, the more danger you find yourself in. So that's the book, and it's a road trip, happens over the space of a week, and I think it'll all come down to how much people like the three main characters, because when bad things start happening, you know
yeah.
that's where you get them. But I love them. I love all three of them. I feel like I know them really well after however many months I've been working on it.
Mm.
we'll see what I decide to do with them in the next few weeks.
Yeah, yeah, and I can tell already. I mean, as you say, if you'd have set this today, it would be a radically different book than if you'd kind of set it in the 80s. And I do think like apart from nostalgia, there probably is a reason why a lot of people kind of gravitate back to writing these books or these movies that are set in the 70s or 80s, because you set some of these things today, and you could just Google the solution to these
Well,
different
and that's
things.
the thing. And that's the thing. In some ways, in some areas so far, I'm like, man, too bad we don't have Google because
Yeah,
Google in some ways could enrich the story because they could find, they're not going to find the answers for what I'm presenting here. They're not going to find the answers on Google, but they're going to find enough stepping stones to help them.
yeah,
Instead, I have to have them going to libraries, looking at microfiche film, and just talking to people. Um, but I also I wanted them to have to do that. That's part of the road trip angle. And who do you trust and who don't you trust and what's their intentions, and I didn't want them to have cell phones, and I didn't want them to have 4K or whatever the hell technology, so
right.
all the answers are right there in front of their eyes. I wanted there to be questions, and yeah, so I'm having a lot of fun with it, and it's one of the few things that I write because I don't usually think in this way, but I'm like, yeah, this could definitely 100% be a movie. So, who
Right.
knows? But yeah, I'm having fun, and like I said, that for me, that's the key. When I'm
Yeah.
finished and turn it in, it'll be something that that I like, and then they can say whatever the hell they want about it on Goodreads. That's okay.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, if you think it could be a movie, then you gotta have those conversations with Ryan Lewis then, and as long as he's not harping on about chess, which I'm hoping if I repeat that enough, then other people can fall for it and believe that actually, like every client, yeah, like with me too, like we start a call and he's like, "Are you gonna play me at chess yet, Michael?" And it's like, "No, Ryan, just settle
Well,
down."
next time I talk to him, I'm gonna beforehand. I'm gonna Google electronic music, and I'm gonna get him.
Yeah, yeah, you gotta do it. We need to make
Sir, I hear you're into it. What do you think about this? It's gonna be like,
yeah.
what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah, right, Ryan Lewis, famous for his love of dubstep and
Yeah,
also, a film
I might
manager sometimes.
I have a complete movie idea about this. What do you think?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm wondering, I mean, we've spoke before, and it's obviously widely known that cemetery dance is where it all started for you. But I mean, what is your involvement with cemetery dance these days?
You know what? It depends on what I'm working on. I mean, I'm still the owner. I still go there all the time, but sometimes I'm just dropping checks off so that Mindy and Megan and them Dan can mail them. My email box is still full with emails from Kevin and Dan and Mindy
Yeah,
and Megan and hey, what about this? What about that? So my fingertips are still in there every day. But when I'm writing a book, man, I mean, when I wrote Chasing the Boogeyman, I probably showed up once a week for 3 months,
mm,
and told them, leave me alone as much as you possibly can. Right now, we haven't really been able to do that because there's a lot of stuff going on. So I've had to do more. But yeah, I've got a good crew over there. So once we're all healthy, I had COVID recently. People have had, flus and this and that. So it just feels like it's that time of year where everybody's back to school and kids are bringing you stuff, and there's more germs in the grocery store and all that. But once we're all healthy and kind of moving at full speed, it'll be a little easier.
yeah, yeah, and kind of pertaining to these different things that you have going on. I'm wondering, what does your writing routine look like these days, and what is a typical, if such a thing exists, day for you in terms of the work that you're doing?
Until recently, I never really had a typical day. The only way I could do everything that I need to do recently is to kind of try I've always just written wherever, whenever. I can write around noise. I can write around other people. I can write in the car while my wife's driving us somewhere. Um, with this book, I have I have started just getting up early in the morning and writing until noon or two, three, one, somewhere in there, and then the afternoon I'll run to the office real quick, do what I'm there, and then I come home and I spend the rest of the day catching up on emails and on promotion stuff for Becoming the Boogeyman. So I have had full days, um, long days. And once I finish this book, it'll be a little bit. Well, it won't be easier right away because, like I said, my October is insane. But after that, it's going to be nice. I'm going to enjoy most of November. I'm going to have a nice Thanksgiving, and then come December, we'll get back to work again.
Yeah. Yeah. What does the promotion look like in terms of the online events, the podcasts, and then the in-person events? And do you feel for yourself personally, has living in this kind of post-COVID world, if we can call it that, I mean, you know what I mean, for want of better phrasing, do you think that has changed the way in which you go about promoting a book?
Um, it's interesting because I got COVID for the first time after doing a local convention here in Havre Grace, which is like 15, 20 minutes away. It was a great convention. We had a blast. I'll do it again next year. But like I said, I don't get out much. I did this because it was local and they were very kind to include me in a large way. And we sold a lot of books over the course of 2 days. And it was very crowded the first day. The second day was fairly crowded, but it never like I went to New York Comic Con and signed Chasing the Boogeyman last year. That was insane. I don't want to do that again. But this was nothing like that. But still, we came home within a couple of days. My wife started feeling sick. She tested positive. I tested positive the next day. Billy tested positive 3 days later. So we were the house of sickness for a couple weeks here. Um,
Mm,
so that makes me feel a lot better about going out and doing all the in-person promotion that I'll be doing in October because I just came off of COVID, so I should be in pretty good.
right.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I hadn't, really put too much thought in there until this recent COVID burst here, on the East Coast.
Mm,
I thought we were kind of past that, and I still hand sanitize and all that, but it is what it is. I'll be careful, and obviously the podcast and the radio appearances and all that are perfectly safe, and it's
yeah.
nice. I can literally be, I set the alarm on my phone, and I could be out there doing yard work in 15 minutes beforehand, as long as I could put on a
Yeah.
clean shirt and wash my face. Um, but I have, I think I have a dozen in-store appearances um,
Mm.
in October, and probably will be adding a couple more. So yeah, hopefully everyone's safe and smart, and we have fun and sell some books and tell some good stories.
All right. Well, thank you so much for chatting to me today. This has, as always, been an absolute pleasure. And I really hope that, becoming the boogeyman is an absolute success for you and so much of a success that the third one, which you're already starting to map out, is guaranteed.
Yes, me too. And I appreciate you asking me again. I always enjoy it, and come back whenever you want.
All right. Well, where can our listeners connect with you?
Oh, well, as we mentioned earlier, I'm on Facebook, all under my own name, Richard Chizmar. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram and Twitter. I'm even on TikTok. I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't put much
Yeah.
on. I have not danced or done any of that. Everyone always asks me, put up a dancing video. I'm like, nah. But yeah, so yeah, you could find me on there and send me messages. Send me pictures of your dogs, whatever you want to do. It's I enjoy it.
Yeah, we've got a TikTok too. I pretty much only post to it every 3 months or so. So yeah, yesterday was one of those times. So a
Oh, good.
special occasion for the TikTok audience. But yeah, it's not really my scene or what I do. So honestly, like it's just kind of clips from the podcast. That's the only way that I
Right.
can do it because if I start making a video specifically for TikTok, and I've tried a few times. It just feels so inauthentic. It's like that's not my personality at all. So really, it's just repurposing parts of the podcast is the only way I can do it.
Yeah. No, I hear you. The same thing. And TikTok has been hugely influential with book marketing, but I haven't
Yeah,
figured it out or really tried to yet. But maybe one day I'll delve deeper and see
yeah,
what's there. But I think again, like you said, I think it's in the cases where it's been successful. I think it's been a very organic thing, and as opposed to
yeah.
super planned.